Yes, next question.
Break the cycle, Morty. Rise above. Focus on science.
If you thought this was a video about calisthenics for muscle growth, incorrect. Changing tack slightly, I want to focus on martial arts that can apparently propel people through the air without touching them. Oh. Anyone for a change of theme on this channel? Just floating it out there, think about it. We have to stop being so binary when we look at questions such as this, the either or answer. And ultimately, what I'm going to recommend that if you are someone that trains calisthenics predominantly, that you incorporate some externally loaded movements into your training to ultimately benefit you and have a cumulative benefit to your calisthenic training also. And so in the words of Jack Bauer, I need you to trust me. Sorry, before I start, got to get some keywords in here just for the YouTube algorithm. James Charles, apparently that's something. Game of Thrones, Burn Belly Fat Fast. Kenny Hacko makes exactly the same videos, H3 Productions, a few days after them. Let's chalk that down to coincidence. And so physiologically speaking, yes, you can build muscle with calisthenics only. And in order to do this, you would need to incorporate the base layer principles of muscle hypertrophy, focusing around progressive overload in your training and a positive energy balance or caloric surplus with your nutrition. And the intangible factor, if you like, of consistency and adherence to your plan. And that's why whenever I see these videos such as I did 100 push-ups a day for a week, look what happened, not interested. Consistency over an extended period of time is what you need to achieve your goals. And I have a great respect for people that train calisthenics. Indeed, I have a video called Pull-Ups for Life where I randomly do pull-ups in different locations. Don't watch it, it's terrible. Just terrible. And so whenever you see those look what happens type videos, behave yourself, people. Behave yourself. Physiology is not that sensitive. But when we look at a calisthenic only approach, my genuine question to people is, why do you have to be so restrictive? And that's not to demean on calisthenics. I love calisthenics. I respect people greatly. But if you have access to various tools of training, which can benefit your overall physicality and attributes and contribute positively to your calisthenic work, why not consider using them? Now, I understand some people may not be able to, perhaps due to financial reasons, perhaps they live in remote locations or they're moving a lot. I understand that for some people it can be more difficult to train in a gym or have external loads than other people. And if you are one of those people, I will get to what you can do with your calisthenics to try and consistently eke out more muscle growth. However, instantly I will say that with a calisthenic only approach, certain movements and hitting certain muscle groups can be less efficient than if you incorporate some loaded movements. For example, a vertical pull using calisthenics is simple and accessible to train. We have the wonderful exercise of a pull-up. However, something such as an overhead pushing movement can be more problematic. For example, the sort of handstand press is much less accessible to beginner trainers. The potential for you falling on your head is there. Here's a free one for my trolls. I've fallen on my head trying that. There you go, give you that one for free. And then you have a pike press. However, again, whenever you're in a position such as that, your shoulder stability and the potential risk for injury has to be considered. And so that's where I will integrate the fact that if you use externally loaded movements, for example, face pulls, or external rotation using dumbbells, for example, it can contribute to you performing your pike press with greater safety, if you like, as you're helping to build up that shoulder girdle and the synchronization between muscle groups. And therefore, as a calisthenic trainee, when you are performing your pike press, you are decreasing the risk of injury. So instantly, that's one example of how you can integrate externally loaded movements to help you with your calisthenics. But in addition, for many people, it can be awkward, less efficient, less accessible to work overhead pressing movements with calisthenics. So why not just throw in some sort of overhead press in your session? It can be a calisthenic dominant session with some overhead dumbbell press or military press. Again, it comes down to accessibility and efficiency. And this question heavily comes down to your goals. If your goal is to, for example, to build as much muscle as you can over the next 6 months, then a calisthenic only approach is not advisable. However, if you are someone that loves to train calisthenics and you want to build muscle, and you want to predominantly or only use calisthenics, of course you can. But you have to understand that whenever you restrict yourself in any way with training, whenever you restrict the tools you can use, of course it can be more challenging to achieve your goals. Not impossible, but perhaps more challenging and in some cases less efficient. For example, the overhead pressing example I've given you. And so instantly I would say if you're only going to focus on calisthenics, then your progressive overload methods are key. If you have an external load, you can add plates onto the barbell, for example. It's quick to do, it's efficient. You can incorporate that into your training. With calisthenics, to do this in terms of increasing load, you would have to use modifications of an exercise to increase the load on the target muscle or movement. For example, a push-up on your knees will put less load on the target muscles than the standard push-up. And then if you lift one leg in the air, you're increasing the load again. And so you can manipulate the load on your body with one leg in the air when you do push-ups. And then you have, this, for example, the Spider-Man push-ups, again, where you're using the load of the legs to put more weight, if you like, on one side of the body, when on the chest, when you're performing your push-ups. And then if you add push-up handles, you can create a greater range of motion. Range of motion is another form of progressive overload. So you have to consider all the different ways you can progressively overload if you're only using calisthenics. And I made a video on this where I discuss many of these issues. We have adding weight, we have increased range of motion, increasing the repetitions. Volume will be your friend. If you're only training calisthenics, you're gonna have to have a good amount of volume, repeated stress on the muscle, these repeated dynamic contractions, which are vital for muscle growth through these concepts of mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. In addition, you can decrease the rest times between your sets. There are many tools you have. And if you're only training calisthenics, you're gonna have to understand the science quite well to be able to constantly, progressively overload your body. However, if we're taking someone over a 6-month or a 1-year period, and we're looking at overall muscle growth, of course, you have to be realistic in your goals. It could be less efficient to get to a muscle growth goal only using calisthenics than if you use other tools. And so when we look at Austin, Dunham, and Daniel, they absolutely incorporate weighted work into their training. Because as they talk about in their videos, and I showed this in the Austin Dunham peer review, which I will link below, he talks about how his legs, it was hard to build up his legs with calisthenics only specifically. So he incorporated the barbell back squat. And so if people are skeptical of yours truly, please go to these people who are very popular in the calisthenic community. Calisthenic Movement has a tutorial on the barbell back squat. And so absolutely incorporating different training methods is sensible, it's common sense, and it can have cumulative benefits in so many ways. Muscle balance with your calisthenic movements, it can help you with risk reward of certain calisthenic movements. Another example of how certain movements or muscle groups can be perhaps less accessible or efficient to train with calisthenics only is your posterior chain. You could, for example, add a TRX in to work on your hamstrings. But again, and I'm going to reference Austin Dunham and Fitness Frequently Asked Questions. And so the reason I put Austin and Daniel on the thumbnail is because they're two successful and popular calisthenic athletes who incorporate weight training as well. And they're not cheating on calisthenics. They're just being smart and using common sense. And the posterior chain is one application of where I strongly believe that you should think about using external loads, for example, deadlifts, because it can, again, be harder to train and progressively overload over time with only calisthenics. You need to consider training over your active lifetime. If you're only using calisthenics, how are you going to consistently increase the challenge? It gets to a point where volume is going to even out the concept of junk volume. And therefore, why not add some form of external load? You can still perform those calisthenic movements, but then you could perhaps superset them or add in other forms of externally loaded training. It doesn't have to be the barbell actually loaded if you don't want to. It can be some sort of squat with a kettlebell. And also, muscle balance is a key factor to consider. Again, when you're using calisthenics, of course, you can train multiple muscles and movements. However, these external tools allow the freedom and creativity to be able to hit certain muscle groups, as I've just mentioned with your rotator cuff. External rotation using perhaps dumbbells or face pulls are very efficient and easy to work into your programming and your sessions. So why not consider them? For me, it's just common sense, and it doesn't have to detract from your philosophy and your love of calisthenics. It's just called being smart and trying to create a balance when you look at your training overall. As with any question, it comes down to a spectrum. It is not so binary, black and white answer. It depends on you and your goals and your characteristics. And so if you absolutely cannot or don't want to use any weighted movements, please try and learn the science of progressive overload and specificity. I have videos on that. Please learn the different ways you can challenge your body, and you will have to be creative. You will have to use more and more advanced calisthenic variations of a movement. You will have to hit muscles from different angles, for example, the decline push-up. And so focus on the principles of training. You have your progressive overload, you have frequency, how many times within a week are you hitting those muscles or movements. You have, for example, your volume. You have the specificity, the exercise selection, which can be key to consistently challenge your body if you're using calisthenics only. And so really the point of this video is for people to be open-minded and not so binary, and obviously focus on their goals. But my recommendation, if you're a calisthenic athlete or you train calisthenics, be open to using some weighted movements. And these larger muscle groups, as for example, the posterior chain, do benefit from having a load attached to them when it comes to your muscle growth. And also it can just make your training more interesting if you have multiple tools. It can help with consistency. And so I hope this video was useful. I'm James Linker. This is Shredded Sports Science. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.